Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fundamental Fridays. I'm Josh Ash. I'm a concept artist who does environment designs, characters, creatures, props, a little bit of everything. And today, Tyler Edlin has graciously invited me onto his YouTube channel to host this week's episode. I'm super excited to be here, and I can't wait to get into it. We're going to be talking about exercises that's going to help us to level up past the point of just drawing the 2D primitive forms. Just drawing cubes, cylinders, spheres, cones, and pyramids. It's a vital skill. But we're going to move past that a little bit and start to modify those and move towards a more organic quality with them. This is a really important skill that helps us at the beginning stages of a drawing all the way through to making the finalized marks on a painting, whether it be creatures, characters, environments. It really doesn't matter. It helps in all of those areas. All right, so let's get straight into it. All right, here we are in Photoshop, and I just want to say it doesn't matter what software you use. It doesn't matter if you're working digitally or traditionally. Whatever tools you have are perfect for these exercises. All right, and a couple prerequisites that are really going to help you with these exercises is a little bit of perspective knowledge. So if you've never done anything with 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective, put that on the list of fundamentals to really dive into. It's a super important subject. And next is just being able to draw the basic primitive forms, so cubes, cylinders, spheres, cones, and pyramids, and being able to draw them really at any angle is kind of a prerequisite to these exercises as well. So we're going to be talking about how to level up past just doing cubes, all different angles, just doing cylinders at all different angles, and how to move towards something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more organic, a little bit more complicated, while still maintaining that good sense of 3D form. And we're going to be talking about how it affects our sketches and drawings like this. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the reasons why it's beneficial at the later stages of a drawing or the later stages of a painting. All right, so here we have a drawing that I've done from imagination. It's not a super complicated drawing in that it doesn't have a crazy sci-fi city behind it with explosions and spaceships swooping down shooting at it, and the T-Rex doesn't have armor and somebody riding it, right? It could be far more complicated. But even if it was a more complicated image or a more refined image past this point, because this is still fairly sketchy, the thinking is still going to be the same. So I've done a few different illustrations of what's going on in my head as I draw something like this, or as I draw really anything, whether it's environments, characters, creatures, it doesn't matter. So at the most basic level, I have the mannequin in my head, the basic mannequin made out of basic primitives. And this really helps establish that depth that I want in the image, the perspective that I want from it, as well as some of the proportions. It's helping me get straight in my brain what's coming towards the camera and what's receding away from the camera in a really simplified manner. Now, again, I'm not drawing this first, lowering the opacity, and then doing a nicer drawing on top. This is just what's going on in my brain as I sketch. Now, as you can see, this is lacking all of the organic qualities that the final sketch has. So there's clearly a step between these two, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So here we have a more organic wireframe. So this obviously has a lot more of the organic qualities, and you can see especially in the head up here, it has a lot of the organic qualities. It has the overall form, but it's lacking the details. You know, the eye's not in there, the teeth aren't in there, but the big structure is there, and it's fully understood at this point. And you can see that I have cross contours around all of the surfaces. Again, these things are going on in my brain. And this is really going to help you get a better sense of believability in your images when you start to be able to think this way. All right, here's another sheet that will further kind of show how this sketch gets simplified into those basic primitives and how the thinking behind it is kind of working. To establish the overall size and shape of, say, the neck here, I am thinking about that cylinder with a slightly more complicated cross-section. It's really as simple as that. This upper leg here, the more organic one, is holding the same perspective. It's the same size as the basic primitive here, except that cross contour now is a little bit more interesting. I'm thinking about that muscle wrapping around the leg, so that's affecting the surface. This lower jaw here is a cube with one end shrunk down. Again, this is holding the same weight as the geometric primitive. but it's just rounded off. It's, I've got a dip in here for the bottom part of the mouth where the tongue will sit. I'm really accentuating this ridge here where the teeth are going to go into. I'm thinking a little bit about the connection point back here and the wrap around that muscle. So it's just becoming slightly more complex. Okay, again, so kind of a prerequisite is being able to draw cubes, cylinders, spheres, cones, and pyramids from any different angle like I've shown here with the cubes. Okay, up next is practice making wireframes with cross contours or wrapping lines or edge loops if you want to use the Blender term, right? So if you've never done this before, stop here at this level, go practice this some before moving on. But just a reminder, if you have done this before and it's been a little bit, our cross contour lines are these lines that wrap around the form that describe the form. So you can imagine this like you're taking a box and you're putting rubber bands around it. And those rubber bands describe the form. So I have a rubber band here that wraps all the way around, and I have a rubber band that goes up and over, wraps all the way around, and then one that does the same thing going the other direction. I could put more rubber bands on here, I could put less, okay? For this instance, I've just put a few, kind of a minimum amount of rubber bands on here to describe the form. Now, you can do this with objects that you find around the house. You can take a string or a rubber band, wrap it around there. If you do that, I want you to do it in a way, so if I have my box here, right, this is a perfect side view box, so there's no perspective, so I'm essentially just seeing this plane of the box, right? When you go to put your rubber bands on it, I want this rubber band here to be perfectly horizontal. I want this rubber band here to be perfectly vertical. Okay, so I don't want a rubber band, facing this way and then one straight. That's just going to get confusing, and we want this to be as simple as possible for our brains to understand. Same thing with the cylinder here. If I have the cylinder, you could go get a can of soup or whatever it may be. So this cylinder, without any perspective and perfect side view, is a rectangle, right? This line is going to be perfectly vertical. These lines are going to be perfectly horizontal. So when I put rubber bands on them, I want it to be perfectly horizontal now. And then you can turn that in front of you and see how those rubber bands change in shape as you rotate that around. And you can do that with all these primitives. Okay, so again, that's a little reminder of cross contour lines. Okay, so onto the exercise number 1. This is where we're going to start leveling up past the very basics here. So we're going to learn how to deform or modify these primitives. These are the words that I use, that I think about when I'm dealing with modifying my forms. There's other words and there's other ways you can modify, but in my head, I boil it down to these. And that's going to be squash, stretch, bend, twist, add, and subtract. Yeah, you could say, well, you could pinch, you could inflate, a whole bunch of other words. For me, this is the way I think about it. So we can squash, stretch, bend, twist, add, subtract. They're all really self-explanatory. It's pretty simple. Now, you can make them even more complicated from this point by combining these things. So you could bend and twist. You could do an add and a squash, a whole bunch of different variants. It's an infinite amount of possibilities here. Okay, real quick, notice on the cross contour lines what's happening when stuff starts to twist or stuff starts to bend. The cross contour lines that would normally be horizontal now have to move and change with the form. Okay, so that's a big difference from this to if these were all to stay the same, right? Technically, that's one way you could describe the form, but it's not a good way or an accurate way. Okay, so this modification, you have a normal cylinder with rubber bands wrapping around it, and then you bend it. What happens to those rubber bands? Then they have to move with the form. Okay, so that's going to be exercise number 1, and I'm going to do a demo in a minute where I do some of these live for you, but I want to show the next exercise as well because there's a lot of overlap here. Okay, and exercise number 2, again, there's a lot of overlap here, but it's drawing organic forms. And by overlap, I mean that these are just those basic primitive forms with multiple modifiers on top. Like this is really just a sphere that's had one side stretched out, and then we've got a few different squash points right there. Same thing with this. It's stretched out and then stretched a little bit more. This is really just a cone that's been stretched out and then bent over. So again, it's just primitives, but because there's more than one modifier on top, and I'm working with more spheres and more of the rounded objects, it's got a really organic quality to it. Okay, something that I want to talk about is, and I want you guys to practice and really experience firsthand, is to experiment with cross contour lines within the same shape. The same outline. This can really make or break a drawing depending on what you're going for if you don't accurately understand what's going on with these cross contour lines and how they affect the form. So I have a few examples here that really illustrate this. So in these examples, I have two of the same shapes next to each other. But as you can see, the wrapping lines are very different. So in this case, that outline is exactly the same. And to prove it to you, it's the same. So I drew the shape, I copied it over, and then I did the wrapping lines afterwards. Same with this. This one to me really is kind of looks trippy. So you can see if you've got a creature and say, like in the case of the T-Rex, you have an upper leg that needs to move slightly towards the camera. Well, if you're thinking about your cross contour lines incorrectly, or if you're not thinking about cross contour lines at all and you're just hoping for the best, you could accidentally go the wrong direction with the texture work or with the lighting that you put on top as you move forward in the drawing and totally flatten out and kill the image. So if I had the dinosaur leg and I put the wrapping lines the wrong direction, it's going to feel flat or it's going to feel broke. In this case, these two objects, it feels like I'm looking like I'm looking under this one and I'm looking on top of this one. This one is a surface level change where these wrapping lines, I'm insinuating that there is a dent here. And then I'm insinuating that there's a bump out here with my wrapping line. So depending on how you want your details, so say you're doing a dragon and you're doing these big, nice scales on them, well, those scales need to wrap the form accurately or it's not going to work. So that's why cross contour lines and understanding them really, really comes in handy at all stages of an image. Next thing that we can do is modifying our cross contour sections or our cross sections. So here's a few examples. So a cylinder is like a tube with a perfect circle as the cross contour, right? Well, it doesn't have to be a perfect circle. It could be an almost perfect circle with a bump out here. And now it's feeling like a shin with a calf muscle wrapping up instead of just, a cylinder with a more tapered bottom. These are just cones with a bit of a bend in them. So in this case, I have a perfect circle as the cross contour cross section. Now I have, this slightly more geometric shape where it's got some flatter sides to it. It's got this bump out here. And you can see how that changes it. Then you can see it here. I have more of a diamond shape. You can see how that changes it, and that's going to create a plane here. You can do it more geometrically like this, where you have the same basic idea, but you're changing your bevels. So there's a lot of varieties here that you should really experiment with and get a sense for how it changes the feeling of these forms. Okay, now we're going to do a quick demo, and I can't do every single modification with every single primitive and every sort of combination you can possibly do because it's an infinite amount. But I'm going to run through a few here. I'm going to start a little bit more geometric, and then I'm going to move on to doing some more organic things. Okay, there's kind of a cube that's been bent. And I just want to say too, we're not after perfection here. We're just after a good sense of volume. If we wanted it to be perfect, we could plot perspective grids and make it perfect, but that's not really the purpose of this exercise. Okay, now there's a cylinder that's been bent. And there we have a pyramid that's been bent. And now I hope you're starting to see too, like what these could be. Like this could be like the bend of an arm, right? This could be a beak to a bird or, some sort of creature. So now we're going to do a cut, and I'm going to go ahead and put some rubber bands, some contour lines around this before I do my cuts. And I'm going to do some cuts that will force these to have to change. All right, so now I've got my cross contours on there. So I'm going to take a big chunk out of this, right, in this sort of cylindrical shape here. So all this has to change. Okay, about right there. I'm gonna say that's good. So this wrapping line now has to conform to the new cut. Right, so it wraps through here and then comes around. Let's do an addition. Now we follow that new form. All right, let's do a twist. If you're having trouble with any of these too, grab reference. Um, go and find something that's a certain shape. If you're having trouble with cylinders, go grab all the objects in your room that involve cylinders. Look at them. Try to study them. If you have any knowledge of Blender, go into Blender and rotate stuff around. You can look at it there as well. Right now, so we have a sphere that's been squashed down. either squashed this way or stretched that way, depending on how you look at it. All right, let's do a little bit of a stretch here. Real quick too, the thing with your contour or wrapping lines when it comes to cylindrical forms, you're going to see a lot more of a curve in that wrapping line, in that contour line, around the edges of the form more than you would expect. So watch out for that area. Make sure you're not doing a line that's going here and then cutting straight into the outline of the form. Wrap it a little bit more than you'd expect. Now, you could squash just one side of these shapes too. You don't have to squash the whole thing necessarily. So if we have a box here and we just squash one side, it might look something like this. And of course, depending on the material, you would get some wrinkles in here, right? Then you have a half squashed box. So when it comes to doing the really organic ones, I think you can do it two different ways, where you just start off with your outline without any care in the world for what it is, and then experiment with those lines within. See if you break it, if you make something out of it, carve into it, really have some fun there. And then you can also do it where you are actually, you have something in your mind that you want to like try to replicate. But in this case, let's just do a shape. Now with this outline here, right, this could be anything. I'm kind of thinking of it as like a claw or a tooth. So with these wrapping lines, let's experiment and see what happens when we do the wrapping lines go in one direction versus another direction. All right, two different feelings now from that, from all that shape. So this is just a sphere that's been squashed and stretched a little bit, right? Into like a bean shape. This is a cone that's had one part of the circle kind of stretched out, and then the whole thing has been bent over. Hopefully you're starting to see the possibilities here and how these add up to creatures and mechs and spaceships and whatever you can put into an environment and characters. Okay, we have another shape that's kind of receding back. Let's do a center line. That's something that's really important, is always knowing where your center line is when it comes to doing creatures and environments, I find. Or creatures and characters. So our center line that's running all the way through it. Okay, let's do an experiment with a different cross contour or cross section where let's say we have a cone and we're bending it or stretching it or whatever to where it's like an animal antler or a horn on a creature. Let's do, we gotta do it in perspective. Let's have it kind of tipped down. Let's do something kind of like that. Okay, and then the next one, let's do maybe, see what happens if we have that kind of shape in it. Something like that. All right, let's see what happens when we do it in a more complicated format. So I know there's going to be a divot through here, and that's going to change my outline a bit to maybe something more like that, and then maybe it peaks back around like that. Hopefully you're seeing too, all the places that I did this just on that simple dinosaur drawing. It's all made of this. The tail has this thinking in it. The neck has this thinking in it. The legs have this thinking in it. Let's indicate this turning a little bit. All right, way more interesting, or at least, depending on what kind of creature you're doing, it's way more interesting. Same basic shape, different cross section. So the cross section on this one is the circle. The cross section on this is like a horseshoe shape. Right? Now I don't have to start at one end and go to the other on this. I may want to find the middle section and how extreme this bump is going to feel. Because if this feels gradual, what if I did this? Right? That's a different feeling. And now let's try to do it with this one. So experiment with these. They don't take all but, a minute. So it's no harm, no foul if you end up doing one that's terrible. And you don't have to show these to people either. Okay, so judging based on the outline of this one, I think I'm going to have to soften this up real quick here. All right, so it's going to have to be a little bit softer. All right, we can cut into spheres as well. So now it looks like a Pac-Man, right? Hopefully you're starting to see all the benefits of this and how it can really level up your drawings to add another sense of dimension and believability to them, even when they start getting more complex and getting away from just those basic cubes, cylinders, spheres, cones, and pyramids into something more organic or more complex. And we can make a more of a boxy form more organic by really, carving away, subtracting away from the edges, beveling them. Right, so this is a boxy form, but we've rounded it out and it changes the feel of it. Right, now let's modify the cross section. Let's do some sort of cross section do a cross section like that. Okay, so now we kind of have the outline. Let's really try to fill the volume. We need to fill the 3D form. Again, it's turning, so we got to account for that. So this is insinuating that there's maybe some sort of ridge or a pretty distinct plane change that we need to show as it turns. Right, so we're showing these plane changes here. We need to account for the other one. So a bit of a point there. It's pretty close to the outline, so we're not going to see it a ton. Okay, now it's starting to turn away from this again, so those contour lines have to flow with the form. And we're going to start seeing a bit more of this again on this side of the horn. Right, and since it's gotten smaller, we can make it, of course, less extreme. And then maybe with the last two, it's just barely there. And then it tapers off completely. Okay, let's just start with kind of a random shape here, and we're going to find the form. All right. Again, you can do some of these shapes, copy them over, and try different wrapping lines on it. See how it changes the form. See if it breaks it, if it makes it feel different, and really pay attention to how does it make it feel different. Does it make it feel like you're looking at a different side of it? It's all really good things to kind of be in tune with. Again, this is a cylindrical form, so we're probably going to need a little bit more wrap than what we were getting there. I feel like with all these, we're gonna need to wrap them a little bit more. It's a little bit better. All right, this looks like could be some sort of like a bear's head. You know, you stick some ears on it. Right, we have the start of a creature. Okay, and notice I'm not doing like a crazy shape like that and then trying to find the cross contours. That's way too complicated of a shape. Um, we want to stick with more simple shapes, and then we combine those simple shapes together in order to make more complex designs. But we don't want to start with that craziness. Okay, so I hope you're starting to get kind of the idea of how you can really practice these forms to get a sense of that 3D volume and then incorporate it into your drawings behind the scenes. And I hope that you're starting to see how important these contour lines are in really making or breaking a design, right? If I start putting on scales, but I'm thinking about my contours like this, that's going to change the way my creature design feels now. It might still work or it might not, but I don't want to leave stuff up to chance like that and just hope for the best. I want to have a good understanding of what's going to happen as I move forward into making whatever image I'm working on. All right, and with that, we're going to wrap up. I really appreciate you guys tuning into this episode of Fundamental Fridays. I really enjoyed making it, and I hope you found it beneficial and that you're starting to see how you can take those basic 3D form drawing skills and really level them up through modifications. This is a skill that helps me all the way at the beginning stages of a drawing, all the way through to making those final brush marks on a painting. If there's anything in particular that you're struggling with when it comes to form drawing, put it down in the comments below. Maybe we can answer it there or extrapolate on it in a future episode of Fundamental Fridays. And while you're there, put down any other suggestions that you'd love to see covered in a Fundamental Friday episode. I'd love to hear about it. A big thank you to Tyler Edlin for inviting me on to host this week's episode. Make sure you check out all the rest of the YouTube videos on this channel. He's got such great resources there that you don't want to miss out on, as well as over on the Patreon and the Brush Sauce Academy website. There's just tons of resources that I know you're going to love there. All right, and with that, I'm going to catch you guys on the next one. All right, bye.